Relax. Mom, you've always liked being backstage. You're just going back to where you belong. Those words cut sharper than any knife. They weren't screamed or thrown at me in anger. They were whispered casually, almost kindly by my son, Christopher, as he took the birthday cake from my hands and handed it to a waitress. I stood there, stunned, cakeless, dignity slipping through my fingers like sugar dust. The restaurant buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses as I walked in, arms wrapped tightly around the chocolate hazelnut cake I'd spent 6 hours perfecting. Christopher's favorite since the year he broke his arm falling from the oak tree in our backyard. He was only 7 then. Every birthday since, even after the divorce, I'd baked that cake. It was a tradition I held on to, one of the few pieces of family that hadn't been ripped away from me. When he saw me, Christopher raised his voice across the room. Mom, you made it. But his eyes barely brushed mine. He's 32 now, with his father's smile. That same warm on the surface, cold underneath grin that once charmed me into believing love didn't require effort. I scanned the elegant dining space, white linens, crystal glasses, gold calligraphy name cards. Half of it had been paid for with my money. The other half, I imagined, was covered by his father, Harry. Money I could have used to fix the roof in my modest one-bedroom rental. But this was for my son. What kind of mother counts pennies when it's her child's birthday? Where should I put the cake, I asked, steadying my voice with practiced lightness. A young waitress appeared, professional and polite. I can take that to the kitchen. Ma'am, your table is this way. She led me past the main celebration area, past Christopher and his friends, past Harry, and yes, even past Diane. The woman Harry married 15 years ago, the woman who took my place at the table and in my sons' lives. We kept walking past my other 2 sons, Logan and Carter, who nodded at me like I was a familiar neighbor they didn't quite remember. And then we stopped, a small table in the back corner, wrapped in balloons and crayons. The children's table. There must be a mistake, I said. I'm his mother. The waitress double-checked her clipboard. Mrs. Victoria Harper. This is your assigned seat. I stood there, arms still empty from the cake, now filled with the kind of ache only a mother knows. Christopher walked over, that same half-smile tugging at his lips. Is there a problem? Mom, I thought I'd be sitting with the family, I said, already feeling foolish. He shrugged, unfazed. We needed someone back here with the kids. You know how they get without supervision. I glanced at the main table. There was an empty seat beside him beside Diane. But I'm your mother. He grinned. Relax. Mom, you've always liked being backstage. You're just going back to where you belong. It was said so easily, as if my decades of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the double shifts, the college tuition payments had been erased with a flick of a smile, as if I were an extra in the background of my own life. I forced a smile. Of course, sweetheart, whatever makes your day special. And then I walked to that corner table, the one surrounded by toys and juice boxes, and I sat, not because I belonged there, but because in that moment, I realized I'd allowed myself to disappear. For 30 years, I wore my role like an old, comfortable sweater frayed at the edges, a little faded, but familiar. I was the dependable one, the mother who understood, the woman who didn't mind being left off the guest list as long as someone sent pictures afterward. Every birthday, every graduation, every family photo where I was just out of frame, I smiled through it. I convinced myself that love meant staying quiet. That sacrifice was the highest form of devotion, But that night, something inside me cracked. Maybe it was the look in Diane's eyes when she straightened Christopher's tie, gentle, practiced, like she had been doing it for decades. Maybe it was the way Harry stood beside her, beaming like he had never lost anything, like I hadn't once been his entire world. Or maybe it was the children gathered around me at the kids' table, wide-eyed and curious, asking me about their fathers when they were little, questions their parents never answered. And I realized these children had no idea who I was. Neither, it seemed, did my sons. They knew the version of me filtered through their father's bitterness, the version that was always too emotional, too intense, too difficult, the woman who had become a shadow in their memories, a soft blur at the edge of their success. But I had been there at 3 a.m. when Christopher had croup and I held him upright for hours just so he could breathe. When Logan didn't get into his first choice college and sobbed into my lap. When Carter stood trembling before his first piano recital and I whispered, "You've already made me proud." I was there. Even when Harry left, I stayed. Even when the money was tight and the walls of our rental home grew smaller and colder, I stayed. I worked 2 jobs, sold my wedding ring, cried in silence behind locked bathroom doors. But I never once let those boys go without love. And somehow, I became invisible. That night, I excused myself from the children's table, walked slowly to my car, and sat behind the wheel. There was a mahogany box in the trunk, something I'd packed on impulse, unsure until that very moment if I'd actually use it. Inside that box was everything I had hidden for decades: adoption certificates, yellowing photos from the orphanage, the original letter from the agency approving us as adoptive parents. I carried that box back into the restaurant. They were getting ready to cut the cake when I returned the cake I had made. I walked straight to Christopher and placed the box beside his plate. "What's this?" he asked, his voice laced with confusion. "Just something I've been saving." "Go ahead, open it." He did. The room quieted as he read the first certificate, then the second, and the third. His hands trembled. "I don't understand," he whispered. "You were 9 months old when you came to us," I said, my voice steady. "Your brothers followed each a year apart. The agency said it was rare to approve 3 adoptions so quickly, but we were determined. We're adopted." Logan's voice broke through the silence. He stood now, eyes flicking from me to Harry. Harry had gone pale. "Yes," I said. "Your father. He wanted biological children I couldn't conceive. When I insisted on adoption, it became a point of tension between us." Diane froze. The image she had curated, a picture-perfect family, was beginning to crumble. I looked around the room at faces I had known since birth, yet suddenly felt like strangers. "There's more," I said. Christopher reached back into the box and pulled out the legal documents for the land. Property in Westlake County, 500 acres, my grandparents' farm. I took a breath. A developer wants to buy it. They offered $17 million. A stunned silence. Then calculations. I could see it in their faces. "I came here tonight planning to tell you I was dividing it equally," I said, voice calm now. "But seeing the way I've been treated, realizing how little space I'm allowed in your lives, I changed my mind." I picked up the papers from Christopher's suddenly gentle hands and slid them into my purse. "For 30 years, I continued, I lived on the sidelines. I measured my worth by what I could give, but not anymore. Mom, Christopher reached for me. "No," I said softly. "You don't get to call me back now that money's involved." When I needed to be seen, You turned away. Now, you'll have to learn to live with that. As I turned and walked out of the restaurant, the evening air wrapped around me like a blanket, cool, still, free, and I thought to myself, for the first time in 3 decades, I was finally stepping out of the shadows. I hadn't planned to ruin his birthday. Honestly, I hadn't planned anything at all, at least not until I found myself standing in the corner of that restaurant, watching my ex-husband raise a toast to the son any father would be proud of, while I sat behind a fortress of balloons and coloring books, cast away like a spare coat no one remembered to hang. That's when I knew. I wasn't just disappointed. I was done. Done pretending that being included was enough. Done ignoring the erosion of my place in this family. Done allowing silence to replace truth. I'd carried that mahogany box in my trunk for weeks. I didn't know why. Maybe part of me hoped I'd never need it. But as I sat there at the children's table, surrounded by tiny hands and big questions, what was Daddy like when he was my age? Something inside me stirred. They didn't know. These grandchildren, bright, curious, open-hearted, had no idea who I was. And worse, neither did their parents. So I stood. My hands trembled slightly as I made my way to Christopher's table, our table. Once upon a time, they were gathering around the cake I'd baked, the same chocolate hazelnut recipe I'd made every year since he was 7, the one that had taken me 6 hours that morning. I placed the box beside his plate. "What's this?" Christopher asked, his brow furrowing as he wiped his hands on a cloth napkin. "Something I've been holding on to," I said. "Open it." Inside were the truths they never knew, truths that had sat locked away in the back of my closet and the far corners of my heart. He pulled out the first paper, an adoption certificate, then another, and another. The room fell into a hush. Forks paused midair. Conversations died. All eyes turned to us. "You were 9 months old when we brought you home," I said softly. "Your brothers came a year apart. The agency thought it was unusual to approve 3 so close together, but your father and I, we were determined." Christopher's fingers trembled. "We're adopted," I nodded. "All 3 of you." Logan stood, glancing between me and Harry, whose complexion had gone ghost white. "But why didn't anyone ever tell us? Because your father didn't want you to know," I said. "He believed it would change how you saw him, how you saw me. He made it clear from the beginning he wanted biological children." I couldn't give him that. There was a pause, an entire lifetime of misunderstandings settling like dust. "Then why did he stay with you?" Carter asked, his voice cautious, as if afraid the answer might undo him. "He didn't," I said. "Not really." When I insisted on adoption, our marriage started to fray. He left when you were still small enough to forget what we were like when we were happy. I watched the gears turning in their minds, watched the stories they'd grown up believing start to twist and fracture. For decades, Harry had told them I was impossible, that I pushed him away, that I loved being a mother more than being a wife. And I had believed it too, believed that somehow, loving them too much had cost me everything else. But now I saw clearly. I brought one more thing, I said, pulling out the property documents. Christopher's eyes widened. "This is for land in Westlake County." "My grandparents' farm," I said. 500 acres. Been in the family for generations. A developer offered $17 million for it. A hush fell again. This time, the silence felt different, charged, wary. I was going to divide it among the 3 of you. That was the plan. I looked at each of them. Until tonight, Their expressions shifted shock, giving way to suspicion, to calculation. I realized something while sitting at the children's table. I said, "I've spent my life giving and giving, hoping that was enough. But it's not. I don't owe you that land, or that money." Logan's voice cracked first. "Are you saying you're cutting us off?" "No, I'm saying I'm reclaiming what's mine, and I'll decide what to do with it." "But we're your sons," Carter said, "your family." I looked him straight in the eyes, and I chose you. I chose all of you. When your father walked away, I stayed. I worked 2 jobs. I gave up my dreams. Not once did I let you feel like second best. But tonight I was reminded I'm not a person in your lives. I'm a convenience, a fixture, an afterthought. Christopher stood now, his voice rising. "This isn't fair." "No," I said. "What's not fair is watching your father who left sit at the head of your table while I was tucked away in the corner. What's not fair is being forgotten until there's an inheritance on the line." Logan stepped forward. "Then what happens now? I'm keeping the land for now." I said, "A portion will go into trust funds for your children's education independent trustees. Not a penny will pass through your hands unless you can show me that you see me. Not as a wallet, not as a babysitter, as your mother." Carter opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "And before you ask, yes, I still love you. I always will, but love without respect is just a burden." I picked up my purse, documents carefully folded inside, and walked out without another word. Outside, the night air was cool and calm. For the first time in years, so was I. The truth is, I almost didn't answer the door. When I saw Christopher standing on my porch, still dressed from the party, his brothers lingering near their cars behind him, my first instinct was to turn off the lights and pretend I wasn't home. It had only been a few hours since I walked out of that restaurant, but it felt like a lifetime. I had stepped out not just from a birthday celebration, but from a role I'd played for over 30 years. But I opened the door anyway. "Mom," Christopher said softly. His eyes were red around the edges. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside and let him in. "Your brother's coming in too." He nodded, and soon the 3 of them were standing awkwardly in my modest living room, Logan leaning against the bookshelf, Carter perched on the edge of the armchair, and Christopher shifting nervously by the window. It was quiet, tense. "You left so suddenly," Carter said. "He's always been the gentle one, the peacemaker." We were worried. "Were you?" I asked, folding my arms. "Or were you just worried about what would happen to the money?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "That's not fair," Logan said, his voice tense. "You dropped a bomb on us tonight. We're adopted. Dad left because of that. And now there's this land, this inheritance suddenly yanked away without a conversation." I nodded slowly. "You're right. It wasn't a conversation. It was a decision. One I made after decades of being treated as a placeholder in my own family." Christopher stepped closer. "You've always put us first. Mom, that's who you are." I looked at him, really looked. My firstborn. The child I used to rock at 2 a.m., whispering lullabies while Harry slept soundly in the other room. The boy I raised into a man who could look at his mother and place her beside the crayons and party hats without blinking. "No," I said firmly, "that's who I was. I've spent 3 decades thinking love meant giving everything and asking for nothing. That being a good mother meant always saying yes, even when I was breaking inside." Logan's jaw clenched. "So this is punishment," I laughed, not bitterly, but with the exhaustion of someone who's carried too much for too long. "It's not punishment. It's a reckoning. I'm not taking anything away. I'm just choosing to live finally for myself. But the land Carter began will go toward my future. I said, 3 million will be set aside for your children's education. The rest, that's mine. Christopher shook his head. This isn't like you. It's exactly like me, I replied. The me none of you have ever taken the time to know. You've seen me as useful, as a source, never as a woman. There was a long pause. Mom, Carter said softly, we didn't mean to hurt you. I know. I said, voice gentle now. But that doesn't mean you didn't. They looked so small in that moment. These men I had raised with scraped knees and Saturday morning cartoons. They weren't cruel, just blind. Raised by a man who taught them love was earned, and women were background noise unless they served a purpose. You think this is just about tonight? I continued. But it's not. But it's every birthday party I cooked for and wasn't invited to sit down at. Every favor asked and never followed by a thank you. Every decision made where I was the last to know or not told at all. We were busy, Logan muttered. So was I. I said, busy surviving. Busy keeping lights on when your father left. Busy helping you through college, marriages, mortgages. Did you think I was just waiting in the background for another call to pick up your kids or lend another check? Christopher opened his mouth, then closed it. I walked over to the side table and picked up a stack of photographs. One of Christopher, age 10, holding his first science fair trophy. Another of Logan in a kindergarten costume. Carter's high school graduation. I held them out to them. Do you remember these days? I asked. They nodded. I do too. I was there, and not just physically. I was all in. I gave you everything I had. I paused. And still, you thought it was okay to sit me at the children's table. That silence, that was different. That was the sound of shame settling in. You're right, Christopher said finally. That was wrong. I nodded. Yes, it was. What do we do now? Carter asked. That's not for me to answer. I said, I've done my part. It's your turn now to figure out what kind of men you want to be and what kind of mother you want to have. They left a while later. Their goodbyes were quieter, more thoughtful. There was no hugging, no promises, just the weight of realization hanging in the air like fog. After they drove off, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, alone but not lonely. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I never expected to see her on my doorstep, not that early in the morning, not ever, really, not after everything. There she stood, at exactly €9 a mem, dressed as if she'd stepped out of a catalog-tailored coat, polished shoes, not a strand of her honey blonde hair out of place. Diane, my ex-husband's wife. The woman who'd replaced me not only in Harry's life, but in the lives of my children. I said her name before I could stop myself. Diane, her lips curled into a tight, polite smile. Victoria, may I come in? Every instinct in me said no, but curiosity, that old restless thing that never quite dies, whispered yes. So I stepped aside and led her into my modest living room second-hand furniture. Faded rug, the smell of coffee lingering from my morning cup. I watched as she looked around, her eyes lingering on the tiny details, the same way my sons had the night before. Not judgmental, just measuring. Coffee I offered, out of habit more than hospitality. She shook her head. No, thank you. I won't stay long. She sat carefully on the edge of the couch, like a guest in a museum. Her purse stayed perched in her lap, held like armor. Neither of us spoke at first. For years, I had imagined this moment, I'd cast her as the villain in my silent monologues, the homewrecker, the imposter, the thief of my family. But now, sitting across from her, I saw something else entirely. She was nervous. Harry told me what happened last night. She began, her voice calm but strained. About the adoption, about the land. I nodded slowly. Did he also tell you why he left? Her gaze dropped to her manicured hands. He said you and he wanted different things. That's one way to put it. I said, he wanted biological children. I couldn't give him that. When I insisted on adoption, he chose to walk away. Her eyes flicked up. He said you became obsessed with being a mother, that you stopped being a wife. A bitter laugh escaped me. Is that the story you've been telling the boys all these years? She had the grace to look away. I didn't come here to argue about the past, she said finally. I came because the boys are devastated. They've been up all night, trying to make sense of it all. And Harry thinks you're acting out of spite. I raised an eyebrow. And you, what do you think? There was a pause. Then she said something that caught me completely off guard. I know what it feels like to live in someone else's shadow. I stared at her, unsure how to respond. You think you're the only one who's disappeared, she continued. You've been the saint in their eyes, the selfless mother who gave everything. That makes me the other woman, the one who could never measure up. I blinked. I filled a vacancy Harry created, she said, her voice quieter now. And for 15 years, I've tried to be what everyone needed, the perfect wife, the good stepmother. But behind my back, your sons still call me Dad's trophy wife, as if I'm not real, as if I don't matter. For the first time, I saw Diane not as a replacement, but as a woman under pressure, a woman picked apart, just like I had been. What does Harry think should happen with the land? I asked. She gave a bitter little laugh. What do you think he says it should go to the boys? That it's their birthright, even though they're not biologically connected to your family. He says it doesn't matter, they're Harpers by name, and the land is Harper land. Of course he said that. Harry had always believed he was entitled to anything that wasn't nailed down. She saw the look on my face. The boys. They're going to fight you on this, she said, especially Christopher. He's already talking about challenging the property rights, claiming you're not mentally fit to handle your estate. The words landed like a slap. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was. He would declare his own mother incompetent, I asked. Diane didn't answer. She didn't need to. He's his father's son, she said simply. We sat in silence, two women who had been shaped, diminished, and distorted by the same man. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Finally, she stood, smoothing her skirt, because maybe I'm tired of watching women disappear, or maybe, she paused, maybe I need to know it's possible to start over. She turned at the door. Whatever you decide to do with the money, Victoria, make it count. And then she was gone. That conversation stayed with me for hours, longer than I expected, longer than I wanted it to. I'd spent 15 years imagining confrontations with Diane. Not once did I imagine we might share something real. Not once did I consider that we were both ghosts in Harry's house, that we were both women who had given too much and been seen too little. As I stood there alone again, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. I didn't sleep much that night. But for once, it wasn't from worry. I lay awake not because of fear or regret or even sadness, but because for the first time in decades, I had a sense of clarity, a sense of control. I wasn't replaying old arguments in my mind or trying to rewrite the past. I was thinking about the future, my future, and for the first time, that future didn't center around what everyone else needed from me. It centered around what I wanted. The next morning, I brewed a pot of coffee, poured myself a strong cup, and sat at my small kitchen table, the same one I'd sat at hundreds of times before while budgeting groceries, writing tuition checks, or signing birthday cards. But this morning, I didn't reach for bills or photos or even my calendar. I opened my laptop and started writing first a letter to my lawyer, then one to my financial advisor, and then, perhaps most importantly, one to myself, a letter of intent, a blueprint, a declaration. I wasn't going to waste the rest of my life asking permission to exist. By noon, I had a plan. I called Sebastian Levine, the sharp, no-nonsense attorney who had helped me during my divorce years ago. I remembered his office had smelled like leather and peppermint. I also remembered that Harry had hated him, said he was too aggressive, too expensive, too loyal to me. That alone made me trust Sebastian more than anyone else in my life. Victoria Harper, he said when he picked up. My God, it's been, 15 years? Too long. I said, Sebastian, I need help with something complicated. 2 hours later, I was sitting in his office again. Not the old Victoria, not the weary, apologetic woman I'd once been scared to ask for what she deserved. This time, I walked in with a straight back and a folder full of documents. Sebastian reviewed everything carefully: the property deed, the developer's offer, the family history, the birthday incident. When I finished explaining, he leaned back in his chair and nodded. You want to set up a trust? Yes, I said, $3 million for my grandchildren's education. And the rest I hesitated, but not because I was unsure. The rest is for me, for my second act, my life. He smiled slowly, approvingly. It's about time. We spent the next hour outlining everything: the trust structure, the independent trustees, the non-negotiable conditions. The funds would only be accessed for college, not vacations or luxury cars. My grandchildren would benefit directly, not their parents. And the trust would be administered by a third party, not my sons. As for the rest of the money, $14 million, I would use it to build something meaningful. I want to establish a foundation, I told him, one that supports women, especially older women, rebuilding their lives after divorce, loss, or abuse. Women who've spent years being invisible and are finally ready to be seen. Sebastian paused his note-taking and looked at me. That's powerful. It's necessary, I said. I've lived it. When I left his office, I felt like I was walking a few inches above the ground, not out of giddiness, but out of relief. For the first time since my sons had been placed in my arms, I had made a decision that didn't involve anyone else's needs but my own. That night, I packed an overnight bag and turned off my phone. I didn't respond to any of the messages, dozens of them, coming from my sons, Harry, even Diane. I booked a quiet room at a small beachfront hotel and drove toward the coast, the setting sun casting gold across the highway. I felt like I was heading toward something sacred, something long overdue. When I arrived, the receptionist smiled and handed me a room key and a complimentary glass of champagne. Celebrating something, she asked. I paused, then I smiled. Yes, a new beginning. I stood on the balcony that night, looking out at the waves. The sky above me was endless. I was finally learning to see my life the same way. I had space now to breathe, to grow, to dream again. My peace lasted exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes. Then came the knock at the door. I opened it to find all 3 of my sons standing there, Christopher at the front, Logan behind him, Carter hanging back near the stairs. They looked exhausted and determined. "We need to talk," Christopher said. I stepped aside and let them in, though every part of me screamed that I shouldn't. "Mom, please," Carter said, his voice already cracking. "We understand you're hurt. We made mistakes. But this foundation, this trust, it's like you're cutting us out of your life." "No," I said quietly. "I'm creating a life I can finally live." "You're giving the money away," Logan said. "To strangers." "No," I corrected. "To women like me. To women who need what I never had." They sat down, their expressions ranging from disbelief to desperation. "I've spent my entire adult life giving to this family," I said, steady now, "giving until I had nothing left. That ends today. I'm not your bank. I'm not your backup plan. I'm your mother, and you forgot that until there was a check on the table." Christopher opened his mouth, then closed it. "I'm offering each of you a seat on the foundation board," I added. "If you want to be a part of something bigger than yourselves, something that helps rebuild women's lives, you're welcome, but only if you earn back my trust." Their silence spoke volumes. I wasn't trying to punish them. I was trying to teach them something no one, especially Harry, ever had. That love without respect is exploitation. That women aren't here just to give. That not every inheritance is owed. I stood and looked each of them in the eye. "The rest of your lives, your choices start now. You can become the men I raised you to be, or you can walk away. But the days of me begging for a seat at the table are over." And this time, I didn't wait for permission to leave the room. I should have known something was wrong when Sebastian's voice was tighter than usual. "Victoria," he said over the phone, "we have a problem." My breath caught. I just returned from the coast, still carrying the calm of ocean air in my lungs. I had spent 2 nights alone, truly alone, and it had felt like a long overdue reunion with myself. But now, his tone dragged me back to the reality I hadn't fully escaped. What kind of problem, he hesitated. That wasn't like him. Sebastian Levine was sharp, fast, and brutally efficient. Silence wasn't his language. "It's best if we talk in person," he said. "This isn't something I want to explain over the phone." I drove back to town immediately, my heart thudding louder with every mile. By the time I arrived at his office, the sky had turned steel gray, heavy with the kind of storm that felt more like a warning than weather. Sebastian was already seated behind his desk, a manila folder opened in front of him, his expression unreadable. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting down across from him. He tapped the folder gently. "I've been reviewing your adoption records. And Victoria, something doesn't add up." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He turned the folder toward me and pointed to a signature on one of the documents. "This is Harry's consent form." He signed it 3 weeks before Christopher's adoption was finalized. I frowned. That's not possible. He fought me every step of the way. He said he didn't want adopted children. He told me the only reason we were doing it was because I pushed for it. Sebastian leaned back in his chair. According to the agency files, Harry was the one who initiated contact. His name is on the first inquiry form, not yours. The room shifted beneath me, like the floor had quietly given way. "No," I said, barely a whisper. That can't be right." He pulled out another sheet. "This is your medical file from before the adoption. Fertility treatments, hospital records. Did you know you became pregnant? I stared at him, mouth open, but no words came. You miscarried in the second trimester, he said gently. You were hospitalized for 2 weeks. There's a note here about post-traumatic amnesia. It says your emotional trauma was so severe that your memory of the event may have been suppressed. A distant memory surfaced faint, like a dream, a hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of machines, Harry sitting beside me, his hand limp in mine, eyes unreadable. I don't remember any of that, I said. Sebastian nodded. That's not unusual with trauma. But what's clear is this Harry knew you couldn't conceive again after that. And yet, he let you believe you were still trying. I closed my eyes. It felt like betrayal layered upon betrayal. He didn't just leave me. He rewrote the story, recast me as the one who'd failed, the one who chose adoption against his will, the one who drove him into another woman's arms. But it had been his choice all along. He let me carry the guilt. He let me believe I'd ruined everything. The clarity was searing. I opened my eyes, breath steadier than I expected. Why Sebastian exhaled. People like Harry, they need control. And when they can't control what happens, they control the narrative. I nodded slowly, and for 30 years, I believed him. Victoria, he said gently. What do you want to do? I want to confront him. I didn't go to Harry's house because I wanted revenge. I went because I deserved the truth spoken, aloud, with nothing left to hide behind. When I pulled up to the curb, his silver Mercedes was already in the driveway, the same car he'd refused to co-sign for me when our youngest needed braces. We need to prioritize, he'd said. Apparently, appearance always ranked above orthodontics. He opened the door almost immediately, as if he'd been watching for me. Victoria, he said, smiling tightly. Didn't expect to see you. Can we talk? He stepped aside. Of course. I walked into the living room that used to be mine. The furniture was different, the colors lighter. The photos on the walls were all of him and Diane and the boys, my sons, on vacations I'd never been invited to. We sat, and I laid the folder on the coffee table. Go ahead, I said. Look. He hesitated, then opened it. His eyes scanned the signatures, the medical records, the agency notes. He didn't say a word. I remember now, I said quietly. Not all of it, but enough. The hospital, the pain, you sitting there while I was in pieces. And then you let me believe I made us adopt those boys alone, that you reluctantly went along with it. Still, he said nothing. I spent decades apologizing for things I didn't even do. I continued, apologizing for being too much of a mother and not enough of a wife, for pushing you away, for choosing those boys over you. And all that time, you knew it wasn't true. He finally looked up. I was trying to protect you. He said, no, I replied. You were protecting yourself from guilt, from grief, from the responsibility of the life you helped build. His voice hardened. You're blowing this out of proportion. I leaned forward. You made me the villain. And you taught our sons to see me that way too. But I won't carry your story anymore. He stood, pacing now. So what, Victoria? You're going to rewrite history, make yourself the hero. No, I said, standing too. I'm going to tell the truth to our sons, to anyone who asks. And if they choose to see you for what you are, then so be it. He stared at me, the man who had once made me doubt every part of myself. But now he looked smaller somehow, less certain. Goodbye. Harry. I left without waiting for a response. Outside, the air was cool, the sky beginning to clear. I called Carter first, then Logan, then Christopher. I have something I want to share with you. I told each of them the truth, the whole truth, and after that, you get to decide who you want to be. And this time, it would be their choice, not Harry's, not mine, theirs. But whatever they chose, I would no longer carry the burden of their father's lies. I had stepped out of his story, and I was finally writing my own. I used to think the worst part of being left was the silence, the kind that settles in your home like dust after the kids move out, the kind that lingers after you realize he's not coming back, not because he can't, but because he won't. But I was wrong. The worst part isn't the silence. It's the story someone else tells in your place. For years, Harry told everyone, our sons, his friends, even Diane, that I was difficult, that I was too focused on motherhood, that I drove him away. And for years, I let him. I thought it was easier. I told myself it didn't matter. But after seeing those records, after learning that he initiated the adoption, that he orchestrated the narrative, and let me bear the blame for a life he helped build, I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. It was time to confront him, not just for what he did to me, but for what he did to our children. The confrontation didn't happen in a dramatic scene with raised voices or shattered glass. It happened in his pristine living room, surrounded by the curated evidence of his new life. Framed photos, white walls, a perfectly arranged bookshelf of biographies he probably never read. He offered me coffee, as if we were catching up like old friends. I declined. I know, I said simply. He raised an eyebrow. Know what? I slid the folder across the table. Medical records, adoption documents, signatures with his name in bold ink. I know you were the one who initiated the adoptions. I know I was pregnant. I know I lost the baby. And I know you let me believe I couldn't have children just to protect your image. He didn't touch the folder. He didn't even look at it. Victoria, he said with that practiced calm, you're letting your emotions cloud everything. There it was, the old manipulation, the way he always weaponized my feelings, turned them into liabilities. Stop, I said. Just stop. He blinked. You don't get to do that anymore. You don't get to twist my grief, my love, my sacrifices into faults. His mouth opened, but I didn't let him speak. You made me feel like a failure for choosing those boys. You made me question if I was enough. And all that time, you were the one rewriting history. I was trying to keep our family together, he muttered. No, I said, you were trying to control the story because you couldn't handle the truth that you chose those children, that you wanted that life, and then you resented me for it. He stood, pacing now. So this is why you're doing all this, the foundation, the trust, the inheritance. I'm doing it. I interrupted because it's mine to do, because I've lived in the margins of your story long enough, and I'm done. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, not guilt, fear, because for the first time, I wasn't bending, I wasn't explaining, I wasn't softening the truth for his comfort. You'll lose them, he said. The boys, you'll drive them away. They've already been gone, I said, my voice calm. I just didn't want to admit it. He leaned forward, trying to regain footing. You'll regret this. Being alone, I'm not alone. I said, I'm free. That shook him more than anything else. I stood to leave. You're going to regret walking out on your family, he said. I turned back one last time. I didn't walk out. I was pushed out years ago. I just finally decided to stop crawling back. The next day, I met my sons at a quiet cafe just outside of town. I had asked them to come. I told them I had something important to say, something final. They sat across from me, 3 men with my stubborn chin and their father's wary eyes. They weren't boys anymore, and I wasn't the woman they used to dismiss with a nod or a favor. I've made my decision, I began. The land will be sold. 3 million will go into trusts for your children's education. It will be managed by trustees, not you. Christopher frowned, but stayed silent. The rest, I continued, will go toward the foundation I'm building, a nonprofit for women starting over after loss, abuse, or betrayal. I'll be the one running it. And before you tell me I'm not qualified, remember that I built a life for 3 boys with no support, no spouse, and no safety net. They sat quietly, absorbing. You will each have a chance to sit on the board. I added, but only after you've shown me that you see me as more than a resource, more than a babysitter, more than a wallet. Carter leaned forward. Mom, we never meant to make you feel that way, but you did, I said. You let your father's version of me become truth. You let him write me out of my own story. I pulled a smaller folder from my bag and placed it in the center of the table. These are the records, the real ones, the adoptions, the medical history, the letters. If you want to understand who I am, read them, then decide what kind of men you want to be. Men like your father, or men who earn their place in this family. Logan swallowed. And what if we want to be neither? I smiled, gently. Then that, I said, would be the greatest gift you could give me. They didn't say much as they left, but their hugs, hesitant, lingering, told me more than words ever could. That night, I sat at home alone, but for the first time in years, I didn't ache from it. I poured a glass of wine, not the cheap stuff, but the good bottle I'd been saving, and I opened my laptop. The foundation needed a name, a mission, a vision, and for once, the vision would start with me. After the confrontation with Harry and the heart-to-heart with my sons, I finally allowed myself to do something I hadn't done in years, dream for me. I booked a quiet hotel by the coast and stood on a balcony that faced the sea, letting the wind rush through my hair. For so long, my world had been made up of obligations, sacrifices, and silent heartaches. Now, with the land deal settled and my foundation taking shape, I was building something for women like me, women who had given everything and been left with nothing. That evening, I opened my laptop, wrote the first mission statement for the foundation, and titled the folder, Second Act. I no longer needed validation from my sons, nor forgiveness from the man who once called me impossible. I needed only this peace, purpose, and the power to begin again. For the first time, I felt whole on my own terms. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is choose ourselves after years of being told we don't matter. This story isn't just about inheritance or justice. It's about reclaiming your voice, your worth, and your right to start over, no matter your age. Have you ever had to choose between your own peace and someone else's expectations? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if this message touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us it's never too late to rewrite your life.